the swamp. I've lived here my whole life. It's not much of a place, no name, no fame. The locals call it the swamp, even though it's not. It's a town. But it feels like a swamp. Always wet, always gray. The air smells of salt, so strong it sticks to your skin. The clouds never leave, the rain never stops, and mold creeps into everything. On the walls, the boats, even the old wooden houses. That's just life here. You don't question it. You live with it. Most people make a living off fishing. That's been the way for centuries. There are no big offices, no schools for fancy things, just boats, nets, and the ocean. It's an honest living even if it's tough. Pull in what you can, trade it in town. If you're lucky, you catch enough for bread, a couple of beers, maybe a coat for winter. If not, you tighten your belt and try again the next day. Me? I'm a part-time fisherman, part-time tourist boat guy. I take folks out on the water, those curious enough to visit this place. There's nothing pretty here. No golden beaches, no clear skies, just gray rain and black waves. But every now and then someone shows up drawn by the stories, spirits, monsters, curses. Everyone loves a good scare, don't they? People come with their cameras, notebooks, and gadgets. They ask about the history, the weird stories, the things locals never talk about, always digging. But something always happens to them. I'm just a fisherman. I don't have the answers they're looking for, and I don't try to stop them. My job's simple. Take them out on the boat, point out landmarks, share the safe parts of the stories, and bring them back. What they do after that is their business. Still, I've seen enough to know better. Live here long enough, and you learn the rules. Not rules on paper, rules you feel in your bones. The kind passed down in whispers. If you're smart, you follow them. If you're not, you don't last long. Take the kids, for example. They don't play outside after dark. No one has to tell them. They just know. It's the same with the fishermen. There's a stretch of water to the west we don't fish. No one explains why. We just don't. And there's a church in town. A rotting little thing with a leaning steeple. The door's not even locked, but nobody goes inside. Not ever. People like me don't ask questions about these things. Questions are for tourists. I've lived here long enough to know there aren't any answers worth finding. It's better not to dig too deep. This place isn't kind to curiosity. I remember one guy. A big city type with a camera and a voice recorder. He asked me about the stories, the church, the Western water. I told him what I tell everyone. It's just stories, nothing to see here. But he wouldn't let it go. Kept poking around, asking the old-timers, sneaking into places he shouldn't. A week later he was gone. Left town in the middle of the night, or so people said. Nobody saw him leave. His car sat outside the inn for days. Then one morning, it wasn't. Just gone, like he'd never been here. People don't talk about it, they just shrug and move on. That's how it is here. This town, it has its ways you don't mess with. Tourists think they're chasing the supernatural lost treasure, whatever keeps them up at night. They think this place is like all the others they've read about online. But it's not. They don't understand. It's not the stories that are dangerous, it's the place itself. This town doesn't like outsiders. It barely tolerates the people who've lived here all their lives. You keep your head down. Follow the rules. Don't draw attention. You survive. But I'm just a fisherman. What do I know about any of this? I take my boat out, haul in what I can, and bring it back. When tourists come, I show them around, tell them what they want to hear, and drop them off at the dock. Nothing more, nothing less. It's an honest living, even if it's not always easy. And yet, after all these years, I can't shake the feeling there's something about this place I'll never understand. Something waiting in the corners where the light doesn't reach. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's better not to know. If you ever find yourself in this place, you'd do well to listen closely. There are rules here and stories to go with them, and breaking either is a mistake you won't live to make twice. The first rule is simple. Don't swim where the dead lights are. Sometimes on the calmest nights, faint glowing orbs appear deep below the surface. The fishermen call them dead lights. They're not fish or jellyfish. They're something else. Some say they're drowned souls trapped in the dark, luring the living to join them. There's no warning before they show up. One moment the water looks normal. The next those lights glow far below. Yellow, green, white, it doesn't matter. When you see them, you get out. Doesn't matter if you're mid-dive or waiting. Once the dead lights appear, you leave. If you don't, you won't be leaving at all. People tell stories about the dead lights, warnings passed down like heirlooms. There's the fisherman's wife who swore her husband was dragged under on a night when the water was smooth as glass. His boat was found adrift, nets full, but no sign of him. Just faint glowing lights where his boat had been. Or the man who disappeared while swimming too far from shore. The others said lights flickered beneath him just before he sank like a stone. Days later, his body washed up, lifeless and cold, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Some say the dead lights are spirits of those who died at sea, angry and jealous of the living. Others believe it's the ocean herself, playing tricks to claim more lives. I don't know which is true, but I've seen the dead lights myself, and I know better than to test them. The guy who did these tours before me told me a story once. It happened one summer, years before I got started. He had a tourist on his boat, a guy in his 20s, all confidence and no sense. The tourist wanted to swim in the ocean for the thrill of it. The old-timer warned him not to, told him it wasn't safe to swim at night. But the tourist just laughed, said the old man was being dramatic, and jumped in anyway. The old-timer sat there, jaw clenched, watching the water. He didn't trust it. Not at night. Not in these parts. That's when he saw them, the dead lights. Faint glowing orbs, flickering just beneath the surface right under the tourist. He yelled for the guy to get out, told him to grab the ladder, but the tourist just laughed again. Then the laughing stopped. The old-timer said the tourist froze in the water, his face changing in an instant. His eyes went wide like he was seeing something no one else could. He looked down, and then he was gone. No splashing, no sound. Just gone. The water stilled and the dead lights flickered out like they were never there. The body washed ashore days later. I've learned from his lesson and never taken anyone out after dark since. It's not worth the risk. The sea is as cruel as she is beautiful, and the dead lights are proof of that. The second rule: always put wax in your ears when passing by Salt Rock. That place is a stretch of rocks coming out of the water like broken bones. The rocks are sharp enough to shred a boat's hull in seconds, and shipwrecks litter the area like broken toys. It's a place you avoid unless you absolutely have to go near it. The danger isn't just the rocks, it's what you can't see. Salt Rock is home to sirens. And no, they're not the beautiful kind from fairy tales. You can't see them, but you can hear them. It starts as a low hum, something you feel in your bones before you hear it. The sound grows louder as you get closer. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in soft at first, like a lullaby on the wind. But if you let it sink in, if you listen too long, you're done for. The siren's song pulls you toward the rocks, draws you in like a moth to a flame. You'll think it's the most beautiful sound you've ever heard. By the time you realize what's happening, your boat will be splintered and you'll be drowning. That's why we use wax. Every fisherman carries it. Soft, sticky stuff to block out the sound. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. I keep a pocket full on me at all times and a tin of it on my boat. If you see me heading out, you'll notice me stop at the dock to press it into my ears before I go anywhere near that place. I had a tourist once, an older guy in his 50s. He'd read about the sirens online and didn't believe in old fishermen's tales. He wanted to see the shipwrecks. He waved cash in my face, but I told him straight up, I don't go there, and neither should you. He found another boat. Someone desperate enough to take the money. I don't know what happened out there. When they brought his boat back, he wasn't on it. The man who took him didn't say a word. He just tied the boat up, got in his truck, and left town. Salt Rock has been that way as long as anyone can remember. The rocks stay sharp, the shipwrecks stay piled, and the sirens stay hungry. No one's ever tried to clear the wrecks or chart a safe path through. It's not worth it. You leave it, alone like everything else around here. This place is full of dangers, but they're not hidden. They're out in the open. You just have to know how to recognize them. The rules aren't complicated, but they're unforgiving. Break them and the sea will remind you who's really in charge. The next rule is for the fisherman. Always check your ropes. You'd think rope is just rope. A simple thing. Nothing special about it, but out here ropes are lifelines. They hold your nets, secure your boat, and make sure the catch doesn't drift away. Without them, you're not just losing your haul, you're putting yourself at risk. So we check the knots, the lines, the fibers. We don't take chances. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, the ropes don't last. Fishermen talk about finding their ropes frayed or gnawed clean through, the ends marked with tiny, jagged teeth. The old-timers call the culprits rope biters. Nobody's ever seen one, but the signs are always the same. Nets floating loose, traps drifting off, and a clean bite through the thickest rope. Rope biters are why we double-check every knot before setting out, and why we don't use cheap lines. Some fishermen even have rituals. My uncle used to spit on the knots before tossing them overboard, swearing it kept the rope biters away. Others sprinkle salt over their nets to bless the lines. Me? I just check my ropes twice, sometimes 3 times before heading out. It's worked so far. Then there's the hair tradition. A lot of fishermen around here grow their hair long, not for style, but for the sea. Old fishermen believe giving a piece of yourself to the sea keeps her from taking the whole of you. They tie strands of hair into knots and throw them overboard as offerings. It distracts the creatures below, they say, giving them something to take so they don't follow your boat. My dad taught me how to knot the strands just right so they wouldn't come undone before sinking. It felt silly at first, like playing at an old superstition. But one day when I forgot, my boat wouldn't stop drifting. No matter how tight I tied the anchor, it kept pulling loose. After that, I never forgot again. Call it coincidence if you want, but I'm not taking chances. Some younger guys laugh it off, calling it an old wives' tale. But they'll learn. Out here, ignoring the old ways doesn't end well. And then there's the salt line. This one's different. It doesn't happen often, maybe a handful of times in a fisherman's life. But when it does, it stays burned in your memory forever. On foggy days, a faint white line sometimes appears on the water. It stretches out past the horizon like someone took chalk and drew it on the ocean. The old-timers call it the salt line. They say it's a border, a line between our world and something else. Crossing it takes you to waters you can't return from. The waters past the salt line aren't part of our world anymore, they're something else. And once you're there, you're gone for good. I remember hearing about a boat that went missing when I was a kid. A small fishing crew, 3 men vanished after a fog rolled in. Days later, their boat was spotted drifting near the salt line. Some fishermen swore they saw the crew waving for help, but nobody went near it. They knew better. The boats passed. The salt line aren't alive anymore. The wood looks too old, too rotten, but the boats still float. And the people, if you can call them that, don't look right either. They're pale, like they've been underwater too long, and their movements are jerky, wrong. If you ever see a boat pass the salt line, turn around. Don't wave back, don't call out, don't go near it, and if someone waves to you from one of those boats, ignore them. They're dead, even if they don't know it yet. I've only seen the salt line once. Early one morning, with fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead, I spotted it. A thin white line cutting across the water. It didn't look like much, just a faint shimmer, but the sight of it made my stomach drop. I reeled my nets in faster than I ever had and turned the boat around. Didn't matter that the catch wasn't finished. I wasn't sticking around to find out what was on the other side. On my way back, I thought I saw something in the fog. A shadow of a boat, maybe, drifting near the salt line. I didn't slow down to check. Didn't look too hard, just kept going. When I told the other fishermen what I'd seen, they nodded like it was nothing new. One clapped me on the back and told me I did the right thing. I've never gone out in the fog since. If it rolls in while I'm on the water, I head straight back. The sea can keep her secrets. I don't need to know them. The last rule is the simplest, but maybe the most important. Never go near the lighthouse. It sits on a barren island, a lonely black shape against the horizon. Nothing grows there. No trees, no grass, not even the stubborn plants that cling to rocks everywhere else. The island is dead. Even birds avoid it, going miles out of their way. Fishermen do the same. You'd have to be desperate or stupid to get close. The lighthouse has been abandoned for as long as I've been alive. Nobody talks about why. Some say the keeper vanished one night without a trace. Others claim the lighthouse was never meant to guide ships at all. Whatever the truth, everyone agrees. It's cursed. You don't go there, you don't look too long, and you don't trust the light if it comes on. The light shouldn't come on. There's nobody there to turn it on. The dock has rotted away, and the only boat big enough to make the trip sank years ago. But sometimes late at night the light shines anyway. It cuts through the fog, sharp and searching like it's looking for someone. If you have binoculars, you can spot strange items scattered across the island. A red backpack, a yellow notepad, a pair of sneakers, a hair comb. Little things that don't belong. People say they're the belongings of those who drowned or disappeared near the lighthouse. Tourists mostly. People who didn't know better or thought they could handle it. The first time I saw the light, I was 15. It was late, well past dark, and I was sitting on the dock with friends watching the waves. The rain had let up, and the quiet was heavy, the way it gets around here sometimes. Then the light came on. At first it was faint, barely noticeable through the fog. Then it grew brighter, sweeping back and forth across the water. Daniel joked that the lighthouse was coming back to life. He laughed, but there was nervousness in his voice. None of us said anything. We just stared. Finally, Jimmy, an older kid who already worked on the fishing boats, stood up. He didn't hesitate. He told us to look away, grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. Jimmy had the kind of authority that came from knowing things we didn't. None of us questioned him. We followed him back to town without a word. When we got there, he told us plainly, we were never to talk about what we'd seen. The light, he warned, wasn't something to trust. It wasn't guiding anyone, it was tricking them. I didn't understand what he meant back then, but I do now. The lighthouse doesn't guide you to safety. It lures you in. And if you follow it, you don't come back. There are plenty of stories about those who didn't listen, like the couple who thought the lighthouse was